South Africa and Mauritius are constantly vying for the position of gateway to Africa, and while South Africa boasts a much larger population and middle class, political uncertainty here, low economic growth and credit downgrades has allowed Mauritius to not only catch up but potentially take over as the most investor-friendly destination on the continent. Now, Surya Hay from Bravura joins us in studio for more. Surya, thanks so much for your time. Well, as a patriotic South African, obviously my heart sunk when I read your note, but you saying that a budget that was released in Mauritius recently is showing that it's gaining ground as the gateway. Can you please just give us more details?
So it's not only the budget, but yes, so in terms of their budget, their growth rate is well in excess of 4%. South Africa, obviously, we struggle to reach 1.7 or 0.8%. But I think the biggest thing is that economic analysts and the world currently sees Mauritius as the #1 attractive investment jurisdiction in Africa, whereas in 2006, Botswana was #1, South Africa was #2. South Africa has now sank to #4. So behind both Mauritius, who is now #1, Botswana, Rwanda, of all places, and only then South Africa.
And sorry, I mean, just looking at Mauritius, despite the size of that population and economically and otherwise, it seemed to be punching above its weight. In your view, what are the unique attributes that make it favorable to look at for investors?
So it's very interesting, you're right. Obviously, from a size and impact perspective, the South African economy is much bigger, much more impactful than the Mauritius economy. But what Mauritius is doing right is there's policy certainty. From a tax perspective, obviously, the government is a benign jurisdiction. And also, they have a lot of policies to attract investment. They give periods of tax holidays for companies who invest there. They have programs where they develop smart cities and techno cities. So from that perspective, they've really tried to get investment into Mauritius, and over the last 10 years that have borne fruit for them.
And you're also talking about the listing requirements here on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, somehow also batting against companies that are wishing to list here. How so, though? Because, I mean, the JSE is heralded as the best stock exchange here on the continent.
So the JSE and our financial markets are obviously, from a transparency perspective, from a technology perspective, the best in Africa. But I guess it's horses for courses. So some companies don't want a Rolls Royce. They are much more cost focused. They want an efficient market, but one where it is a lot cheaper, for example, to list. And especially companies who want to invest into African jurisdictions and not only into South Africa. So for them, Mauritius makes a lot of sense.
Sorry, let's talk about transparency, especially in regards to tax issues. And this is obviously both, it's a double-edged sword for Mauritius. I mean, it could work for it, but also with a stigmatism around tax havens. In your view, what are the pockets of opportunity for Mauritius in this regard?
So you're absolutely right. I think a decade ago, Mauritius had this cloud of being seen as a tax haven. The OECD actually in the last week have said that they see Mauritius as tax compliant now from OECD perspectives. And Mauritius is currently on the list of recognized jurisdictions. So they're not seen as a negative tax haven, they're actually seen as completely compliant with OECD and your common reporting standard regulations worldwide.
But Surya, it can't be all sunshine and roses there for Mauritius. There must be some risks.
There are many risks in Mauritius. I think, you know, for me, and you speak about the patriotic South African, you know, South Africa from a resources perspective, from what we have going for us, from our agriculture sector, etc., has everything to beat Mauritius. Mauritius really, their main industries would be financial services, tourism, etc. They don't have the mining and the agriculture that we have in South Africa. They also don't have the population and the big economy. But I think what this shows is if you have a government focused on doing the right things from an investment perspective, how well that can actually work for a country.
Well, Soria, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for those insights. That was Soria Hay from Bravura.